When I pulled into the store on Interstate 75 between Sherman and Denison, Texas, it was raining off the highway that afternoon. The rain was such that my vision dropped to a couple of feet, and even sitting still, I couldn't make out the store sign between my car in the parking lot and the entrance. When I landed in Dallas and Fort Worth, the skies were gray, but the rental agent told me that I would probably encounter severe storms as I approached Lake Texoma to the north. I was headed to one of our plants in Durant, Oklahoma, to supervise the installation of a new extruder in the shop and needed to be there by the start of the next morning shift. It wasn't that far of a drive from where I was located. It was a last-minute trip that I had to make the night before when one of the engineers working in Durant got sick and I got the assignment. My wife also travels a lot for work, and this was one of her weeks. She was in Atlanta for a conference, and I would have finished the job about the same time she got back. I walked up to the counter with a bag of chips and a soda, and the little schoolgirl punched the check and handed it to me. "Are you heading north, sir?" I let her know I was. The state police just shut down northbound Interstate 75 at the bridge. Several tanker trucks got into a big accident and shut it down. I think they're going to divert all traffic across 82 onto 377, but there will be traffic for miles. I thanked her for the information and headed to my car to decide what I should do now. The rain was still pouring down in torrents. From where I was, I could make it to Durant in 15 to 20 minutes on dry asphalt if it cleared by morning. Given the conditions, that meant an overnight stay on the Texas side of the border. I fired up the Honors Club app and booked a room at the Texoma Garden Inn, located less than a mile from where I was on one of the access roads, and headed that way. "Mr. David Hoff?" asked the receptionist, checking my reservation. I confirmed that it was me, and she handed me a room key card. It was a typical hotel for business travelers. It had a breakfast room, and for this rainy day, a nice bar and grill to pass the time if I wanted to stay for the evening. With a quick phone call to the plant, I settled into my room. I have this attitude about hotel rooms. I don't like them, even though I live in them so often. I couldn't stay in the room for more than an hour. I tried to call Tracy, my wife, but I couldn't reach her, so I left her a message and let her know I'd call later in the evening. "So, what do you want to order for dinner?" the clerk asked, when I inquired about a good place to eat and maybe have a good beer. "I think you'll like the freewheels behind the hospital, across the highway from here." I took the advice and made the short drive that evening. It was crowded, so I agreed to take a seat at the bar and eat a burger and drink a beer right there. The band had just started playing when I finished my plate, and the next beer arrived. The next few moments could probably be called a pause in what I could consider reality. The song "Loose Wheels" became an extraneous background, and if you can imagine what the feeling of horizontal vertigo might be like, that's the best I can describe it. I watched as she brought her wine glass to her lips and wiped the stain on her napkin. She was smiling, happy, definitely not in pain, and she wasn't alone. With her was another couple and a man I had never seen before. The other woman I knew. They were very close, and at least to me, it was obvious that all four of them knew each other well. This closeness was not acquired overnight. The two of them were roughly what I envisioned Tracy and myself to be, only it wasn't me sitting at the table. I watched as my wife of 4 years leaned over and kissed the man she was with, her lips lingering on his before they both stood up and walked out onto the dance floor. From where I sat, I could watch every furtive exchange they had, every hug and every touch on the cheek. I don't know how long I sat there watching them. Everything else around me didn't matter, and as if on autopilot, I pulled out my card and held it out to the waitress to pay the bill, while the two lovers continued to move on the floor. By the time the song was over, I had signed the check and watched the two of them return to their table. He held out a chair to her before she sat down, and as he sat down himself and moved to the table, she looked up. And it may have been the greatest coincidence of all time. A bright bolt of lightning struck the ground outside and was immediately followed by a mighty roll of thunder just as Tracy's eyes met mine. I don't know why I did it, but I slid off the stool and walked over to the table while Tracy's eyes grew large and her face lost color. By the time I got to the table, she was already shaking, crying and trying to get out words I just couldn't hear. "Hey, Tracy. Don't get up on my account. I'm just leaving." I took off my wedding ring, looked at it, and held it up to my hand as if evaluating it. 24-karat gold. It's probably worth more now than it was 4 years ago. "Buy yourself something nice with it." I tossed it on the table in the middle of the two couples, turned and walked out. I remember thinking to myself what a bloody coincidence as I turned on the ignition in the car and headed back to the hotel. She stood at the entrance and watched me drive away with her hand covering her mouth. I will never let you see my broken heart hurt. I have pride, and I know how to hide all the sadness and pain. I will cry in the rain. Tracy Gallant was a 29-year-old employee of an IT services company when I first saw her at a coffee shop in downtown Charleston, South Carolina. She was having lunch at a table with a few other people, and I met her while waiting for the restroom. A damn unfortunate place to strike up a conversation, but we managed it. She was the image of the American girl next door, with short cropped hair and a dress that revealed just a glimpse of cleavage, but gave hope of what lurked beneath. We've all heard stories of falling in love at first sight. But that didn't happen. I fell in love at second sight when she joined me at the bar after her party was over. I worked for a plastics manufacturer in North Charleston, spending half my life traveling as a troubleshooter, and Tracy was doing pretty much the same thing in her professional field. She grew up in North Texas, and after graduating from Austin University and working in Dallas for a few years, she decided to make a complete change of scenery by taking a job as a troubleshooter for a company on Daniel Island in the Charleston area. I started my career with a plastics extrusion company and stayed with them ever since, climbing the ladder and becoming the person they turned to when deadlines were missed. In my 30s, most guys consider me an early achiever. I, on the other hand, think I'm just consistent and see things through to the end. So, Dave Hoff, you or me? I didn't need to be asked twice. She followed me to my apartment on the peninsula, and I realized how damn good my future wife was. I'm going back into town next Friday. Let's do it again, this time at my place. Only after a proper dinner and drinks. I'll pick you up at 7 p.m. From that point on, the marital race began. When our work schedules allowed, we became a couple. I have to admit that for a while we were arm's length because when I could be in Scottsdale, Arizona for work, Tracy could just as easily be at home on Daniel Island. By the time I got back, she could have already flown to Houston. Two professional travelers didn't have to figure out how to connect. We created a system of connections. If we traveled through Atlanta, Cincinnati, Memphis, or any other place where our paths crossed, we would book a hotel room at the airport and continue on our way in the morning. It gave our romantic relationship a special twist. It went on like this for a few months, and eventually we sat down and analyzed our business trips, locations, and frequency of intersections. We realized that 2/3 of our trips were in the same region if we managed our schedules to our advantage. So that's what we did. It worked better than we thought it would. We were both on the road 50% of the time, and most of the time we were able to travel together. We have a plant in Arkansas, and Tracy has a hospital client in Memphis. We would coordinate our trips so that we would fly into Memphis, and then I would take a rental car to Pine Bluff. On the way back, I would join her at her hotel the night before, and we would go out to dinner and then get busy. We repeated this pattern in other places as well. Finally, we were able to coordinate our trips so that we ended up in New Orleans on Thursday afternoon, and we made a weekend of it. Over dinner at the Commander's Palace restaurant, I proposed to Tracy by kneeling in front of the entire dining room, and she accepted. Sunday afternoon, we were up in the air again to catch the flight back to Charleston. Charlie, this is Tracy's cousin Lynn. Lynn, Charlie is an engineer in South Carolina. Tracy's sister Lucy turned to the woman next to her. This was the third time Lucy had introduced me at the reception as Charlie. I had never met anyone from Tracy's family other than her parents until we flew to Denton for the wedding. Lynn, I'm Dave, not Charlie, I said, glaring at Lucy. Tracy's other two sisters were friendly, yet aloof. Anyway, I didn't let that ruin the day. Tracy and I turned our attention to each other, and thankfully, I got along great with her parents. I pushed aside thoughts of personal insults, and later that night, my fiancé rocked me in bed until 3 in the morning. The next day, we went on our honeymoon to Jamaica. For the first couple of years, married life was good, very good, and Tracy and I managed to synchronize our travel schedules with few interruptions. Then she got a promotion and things started to change. Her clients were reassigned, and she started spending a lot more time in Minneapolis and Dallas. In fact, 2/3 of her travel was to those two locations. My company had nothing in the Minneapolis area and only a plant in Durant, Oklahoma. Dave, it won't last that long, just a couple years or so, and then I'll be gone, and maybe then we can work on that baby we've been talking about. It was a nice carrot since we'd already been talking about starting a family for months. Seriously, Dave, I know we're going to merge the department when my boss retires, and then I'll probably only have to travel once a month or a couple times a quarter. The fact that we both traveled a lot has many drawbacks, one of which is a yearning for the pleasures of being a spouse, and temptations on the road are frequent. Since we've been married, I haven't looked at anyone but Tracy, but sometimes it's not the eyes, it's the thoughts. Dave, this is Susan DeLong. She'll be your traveling companion for a while so you can get settled in and get your bearings. My boss Monroe informed me of this one morning in his office with a smirk on his face. Susan was a new employee of one of our competitors in her early 30s, a natural blonde with a damn fine body, a terrific smile, and an appropriate personality. Her husband was working abroad in Saudi Arabia, and she had made it clear to him that there was no way she was going to live in that socially backward country. Nevertheless, the opportunity was too financially lucrative to pass up, so he rotated to his home country every 12 weeks and back after 4 weeks. This arrangement suited Susan's travel requirements at our company perfectly. The two of us made several trips before we got stuck at the Doubletree Hotel in downtown Memphis. We were caught in an ice storm during a rare southern storm that had icebound the airports from Memphis to Charlotte. Tracy was in Dallas and stayed the weekend to visit one of her sisters, as she needed to return there on Monday. After a light dinner, Susan and I had a couple drinks at the bar and just talked about everything in the world. Despite her beauty, I really liked her, and frankly, I thought her husband was a damn fool for leaving her alone for months on end. In the morning, with nothing to do and our flight delayed until the following afternoon, I became quite sophomoric. We were joined by 2 other couples who were also stranded, and soon we were chatting like long-lost friends. Somehow, the conversation turned to drinking and what crazy things had happened to each of us during our more adventurous youth. By then, I had already drunk a little more than I should have, but the women were starting to dare me, especially dare me with tequila. God knows I knew better, I really did. Tequila and I have a long history with tequila. They say tequila makes women lose their clothes. In my case, it's common sense and most of my memory. One of the women, Carol or something, ordered a batch of cocktails. Before I knew it, we were on to round 3, and that's when I stopped keeping score. I remember the women playing musical chairs on our laps, and at one point Susan found herself firmly planted on a very grateful and growing accessory. I don't know where my hands were, but they weren't on the table. A short while later, according to the story, the 6 of us were taking the elevator to the cheers of the other visitors. 2 couples ended up in the suite across from mine, and Susan led the 2 of us to my room. I honestly don't remember what happened when the door closed. Everything else was lost in my memory until we woke up the next morning. She was smiling and I was confused. Susan, what happened last night? It was the best night ever. Just you and me. I screwed up, I told her. First, no matter how much a person drinks, I think they have a willingness to do wrong, even if inhibitions are completely lifted. Sure, the ability to resist can sometimes be feeble-minded, but taking action to find oneself in that state was certainly voluntary. I know what happens when I drink too much tequila. There's no excuse for it, and now I've turned on my wife, which is the last thing I wanted to do when I took that first drink. As I sat and pondered, Susan just sat there with the sheet wrapped around her waist. Dave, if it's any consolation, what we did won't go beyond this room, I promise. Just so you know, this is the first time I've done this since Billy started working for the Saudis. It's not something I've practiced, I swear, and like you, I'd like to keep it just between the 2 of us. Yeah, what happens in Memphis stays in Memphis, right? I had to chuckle at this predicament. Susan gathered up most of her clothes, put them on, and headed to her room to get cleaned up before we met for breakfast downstairs. Neither of us held a grudge against the other and promised not to let it happen again, even though we both knew that whatever had happened was a damn good thing. It was the only time I'd ever cheated on Tracy, and instead of opening a big can of worms, I decided to keep it to myself. She wasn't going to find out about it, it wasn't going to happen again, and I was certainly going to do my best to make it up to her. I say for myself because I'm the one who let her down, at least until she knows about it. My single transgression aside, everything in the Hoff household continued as before. I was still traveling with Susan, and for that matter, our friendship had strengthened rather than weakened as one might assume. Tracy, on the other hand, was away more often than she was home, most often in Dallas. Of course, that allowed her to see her family, but if I saw her more often than a couple days a week, I was lucky. Tracy looked great, really good. She had updated her closet and made her outfits look more feminine and less businesslike. I wasn't going to complain, of course, because my philosophy was that why spend so much time working out at the gym to then hide it under many layers of clothing. Her sister Lucy came to visit us one week when Tracy was working in the home office. She didn't call me Charlie this time, but she didn't have much to talk about either. Both sisters were in their own zone, and most evenings the two of them would go out for a drink together. On one such evening, the three of them showed up, and I had to help Tracy into bed. When I got back to the living room, Lucy was already sprawled on the couch. "I don't know what Tracy sees in you, Davy, I really don't," she murmured, looking at me with half-closed eyes. "She could have had any number of good men back home, hell, she still could. Or maybe she does now." Lucy laughed in relief at the thought. Instead of getting angry, she thought it was funny as hell and waddled toward the guest room. Anyway, I went to bed, angry not only at Lucy, but also at myself for the guilt that still lingered inside me. I was glad Lucy was gone, but the next few months got worse. Tracy was now going away for 2 weeks at a time, preferring to stay in Dallas or Denton for the weekends. She was trying to make up for the time she'd missed when she was here, but there was something else I couldn't find a handle on. We'd been married for 3.5 years now, and I'd never had any reason to doubt her devotion. Tracy's other two sisters, Claire and Torre, had become quite demonstrative toward me in general after the wedding, especially Torre. She called me one evening a couple weeks before Tracy was scheduled to leave for a week-long conference in Atlanta. "How's my son-in-law doing?" "Only half as good as your husband, Torre." "Does he sit and listen to you?" "Sits." "Look, I don't want to talk out of turn, but Jimmy and Claire and I are a little concerned about how much Tracy is drinking right now." "Really?" "I haven't actually noticed, but then again my wife seems to be away a lot more often than she's here." "Yeah, that too, she seems to have moved in with Lucy." "Lucy has always been the wild one in the family, and Tracy has always looked up to Lucy as a role model. Are you two getting along okay? I know it's none of my business, but we're concerned and we love you very much." Torre brought up a topic that had been bothering me lately. Tracy was having 3 and sometimes 4 glasses of wine at and after dinner. We were still affectionate, but I had a strange feeling that she was working on it more than she needed to. Torre and I talked some more before we ended the conversation. I had some things to think about. I knew how Tracy behaved when she drank. I had the same concerns about her that I had myself when I drank too much. It was Lucy's influence that worried me more. "Tracy, do you still stay with your parents when you stay late in Dallas?" "Yes, dear, why do you ask?" "I thought maybe next time you have an extended business trip I could join you and see your folks." "I haven't seen them since last Easter." I wasn't being entirely untruthful. I would make the trip for that purpose, but I also wanted to see if Tracy would lie to me based on what Torre had told me. This was troubling and bothered me right up until she left for the conference. We got into it the night before we left, and in the morning I drove her to the airport for her flight to Atlanta. "Dave, Will Jones got sick yesterday and they ended up taking out his damn appendix. That means they need someone sharp on the floor right away." Monroe only laughed. "You've been doing it for years. Give it your best shot, kid." That meant a quick trip to DFW and a move to Oklahoma. Nothing out of the ordinary. By 7 p.m., I had managed to get the last seat on the plane for the 9 a.m. flight the next morning and was in Durant, Oklahoma by late afternoon. Monroe called Susan and asked her to join me in Durant, even though she couldn't get a reservation until later that evening. The flight was uneventful, except that we hit turbulence as we entered Central and North Texas airspace. On the ground, I rented a car, and the porter informed me that there were severe thunderstorms east of the lower panhandle that produced large hail and a couple tornadoes. If you've never been caught in a Texas downpour, you haven't seen the best that rain can bring. I sat in a couple of these downpours that gave me a 360-degree panorama of lightning and golf ball-sized hail falling everywhere. I sat under an overpass as the highway on either side of me was dotted with layers of huge hailstones, and a tornado tore apart a farmhouse and barn just east of me. I headed north on Interstate 75 toward Sherman and the Red River Bridge, watching for ominous storm clouds along the way. As I approached southbound Sherman, the sky opened up and everything on the highway came into motion, and stayed that way until I saw a quick stop on my right. It's a good thing I stopped, because a couple tanker trucks got caught up in each other going over the North Bridge, and the metal carnage brought everything on the river to a halt. Fortunately, there was room available at the Sherman Garden Inn. Once settled in, I informed the plant that I would be there in the morning and sent the same message to Susan. The burger the waitress put in front of me was a double patty, medium rare, and one of the best I've ever had. I washed it down with an ale on tap and ordered a second glass. At that moment, everything fell into place. Everything that hadn't made sense to me, all the long drives, the long overnight stays in Dallas or Denton or wherever, it all made sense now. There's a difference between a one-time thing and an ongoing affair, at least in my mind. Given my own history, if Tracy had entertained herself in a hotel room in my absence through stupidity or underhandedness, I'd be okay with it. I could even pretend I didn't know about it and go on with my life as if I didn't know. What I saw was not a one-time occurrence. It was an ongoing love affair, the kind of intimacy shared by a couple, not a crowd. Both couples were oblivious to their observer. The crowd was lively and noisy. The orchestra had just played a Texas duet. I watched the lovers with a queasy feeling in my gut as they danced and shared their intimacy. The waitress returned my card, and after signing the check, my eyes burned into my traitorous soul the image of them returning to the table. Was I angry? No, I was stuck in neutral with the pedal to the floor, and if I saw her precious look in his eyes one more time, I might shift gears and the resulting torque would blow the entire establishment to smithereens. Her eyes met mine, and in the same instant, lightning filled the air with a thunderous boom, and I silently walked over to the table. Hey, Tracy. Don't get up on my account. I'm just leaving. I took off my wedding ring, looked at it, and held it up to my hand as if evaluating it. 24-karat gold. It's probably worth more now than it was 4 years ago. Buy yourself something nice with it. I looked into Tracy's sad eyes and felt my heart break. I glanced at her sister Lucy but felt nothing, and before anyone could speak, I threw the ring on the table and turned, heading out the door. She stood in the entryway with her hand over her mouth and watched me drive away in the rain. Damn good job, guys! Damn good job! The plant manager was glowing with pride as we put the new extruder line into its first run. Susan was in the final stages, and I was powering the hopper and monitoring the auger. The first run was through a set of dies to make water bottles for automotive advertising. After 3 days of working on the rig, everything went off without a hitch. Later that evening, Susan and I were having drinks, staying at the Choctaw Casino and Resort a couple miles from the plant. So, are you ready to talk about it now? She asked. She asked. She asked. I don't. I still don't know any more than I did Tuesday night. I haven't talked to her yet. Hell, she's left me a dozen messages and I don't know how many texts. I don't know what to say to her. It was all true. All I knew was that my wife was clearly having an affair with some guy on her home turf, and her damn sister was clearly involved. But that wasn't all I knew. Tracy was in love with him, whoever he was. I could see it in her face, and it was impossible to deny it. Somehow I had buried and put it out of my mind for the duration of the extruder job, and now that it was all behind me, I was faced with my own reality and hell. I knew at some point I would have to talk to her. Do you still love her, and if you do, is that enough? God, what a question. It really was a question. I loved and I didn't know. I looked at Susan and took her in my arms. This was a woman most men would die for, and her husband was going away for 3 months. If he had known he was losing her, I would have thought he would have wanted to quit his job and put her in his arms again. So why didn't I feel that way about Tracy? I knew the answer. She loved him. She loves the hell out of him, Susan. It doesn't matter. She sat silent with a note of melancholy, a note of sadness. Do you think, Dave, you can love 2 people? I don't mean whether you can put up with a love affair with another man, but do you think a woman or a man can love 2 people at the same time? If so, do you think a woman can make the right choice if her husband thinks love is enough for 2? I know she meant what she said, but I had to laugh a little. A playful smile appeared on her face. I'm being serious. You still love her, I know. And now you have to ask yourself if it's enough. And if so, will you fight for her? What if she found out we were lovers, even for that one night in the storm? Oh, damn it, I decided to snap. What if she found out I was leaving my husband and ending up in your bed, if she dumped you for what we did? You'd leave your husband for me? I asked half seriously. She was serious. Maybe, but Billy and I are almost broken up. He signed a new 2-year contract, even when I told him I was sick of being a husband 3 months out of the year. You know what he told me? He told me to get myself an unobtrusive lover on the side if I needed it. Hell, that tells me he's already doing that. So yeah, I'd file today if I knew I had a chance to sleep with you. She laughed lightly, but her eyes were moist. You need to talk to her and find out what you two have left. I don't mean a phone conversation. I mean you two need to sit down and get it straight. And with those words, I'll call it a day. I have an early flight back in the morning. She stood up, leaned over, gave me a quick kiss on the lips, and left me to ponder her situation. When Tracy was a little girl, Denton was still a relatively small town. Today, it's a sprawling suburb of Dallas and Fort Worth. Nevertheless, Steve and Donna Gallant still live here, and their 3 daughters are no more than a short drive away. The 2 older girls have husbands and 2 children each. Lucy was the only one living in Dallas. Tracy was a toddler. I walked up the tile steps, and before I could knock, Donna had already swung the door open and enclosed me in a warm hug. Steve had already headed to the refrigerator to get a couple bottles of cold beer. Dave, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. I really don't. Donna looked like she wanted to cry, but didn't. Torre told us everything after she had to almost pull Lucy's teeth to find out the truth. I'm so ashamed I just want to die. Donna, none of this is for you. We're all adults and we're each responsible for our own actions, not the actions of others, I said, trying to comfort her. Steve handed me the beer and we sat down at the kitchen table. Dave, Donna and I will be there for both of you no matter what happens. Tracy is our daughter and we'll do everything we can for her, and you need to know that you're our son too, and we'll do whatever you need to. It's important to us that you know that. Guys, I haven't talked to Tracy yet, so I only know what I saw last night, and that's not good for me. I'm going to fly home tonight and try to figure out what to do next. Well, here's what I know about this mess, Dave, Donna offered. Lucy has been playing matchmaker for Tracy since she was fresh out of college and living with Lucy in Dallas. She almost succeeded once with a young guy from Denison. His name was Charlie Duguay, and they were engaged for a while until something happened, and she left here for Charleston, and then she met you. For the last couple years, Lucy had been seeing her brother Charlie every now and then, and God, this is bad. According to Torre, Lucy talked Tracy into going out to dinner with them, and then Charlie showed up again. Well, then you know how it ended. I pretended everything was fine, and the 3 of us had dinner, and later in the afternoon, Torre showed up with the 2 kids. I always imagined that Tracy and I would end up in the same role someday. Dave, she really loves you. She just doesn't know how to look you in the eye after what she did. She's never talked to you about Charlie Duguay, has she? I shook my head. When I found out it was him, I wanted to beat the shit out of Lucy and Tracy, Lucy more so. I love my sisters, but this really pisses me off. Torre, you don't need to get involved in this. I'm going to meet Tracy when I get back if she's still there and tell her everything. Maybe so, but you should know that Tracy doesn't understand a damn thing when it comes to Charlie. He's turned into a jerk from day one, but she thinks he walks on water. She caught him with his girlfriend Lucy one night after they supposedly got engaged, and the next thing I know, she's gone to Charleston. He convinced her it was a drunken one-time thing, but by then she had met you, and that was the end of it. Mom said she told you the basic information I got from Lucy. God, I'm so mad at her. Apparently, the whole Gallant family is furious, and Tracy has flown off, or so everyone thinks. I played with the kids for a while, and then, after hugging them and kissing them, I headed to the airport to fly home. My flight arrived around 11 p.m. that Saturday night, and as I pulled into my parking spot, I noticed Tracy's car was parked there, but all the lights were off. I entered the house thinking she was sleeping in the bedroom, but the bed was empty. The guest room was empty too, and there were 2 suitcases next to the closet. Throwing my clothes in the washer, I showered, put on some comfortable jeans and a pullover, and then headed out the door. I needed to unwind. Living in the city center, we have a great selection of evening entertainment within walking distance. Market Square is only a short walk from my apartment, and one of our favorite places to hang out is Henry's Restaurant. It was past midnight when I arrived, and the night crowd was just starting to show up. You want the usual, Slick? Asked Satch. He was the late-night bartender, a nickname he got because he looked like his namesake. Yeah, and another one after that. He set 2 black Russians in front of me, and I just grinned. I wouldn't be needing a cab. Your landlady was here about an hour ago, some guy with her and another girl I've never seen. Short blonde, peacock tattoo on her shoulder? Yeah, dude, that's her. I guessed it was Lucy. Torrey had told me that she thought Lucy might have flown off with Tracy rather than let her deal with this alone. But it didn't matter. Lucy meant nothing to me, and I wasn't going to let her interfere with what Tracy and I needed to talk about. If she thought she was going to stay in my guest room with her buddy, she had something else entirely on her mind. I sipped my drink, and soon the regulars were engaging me in their conversations, and by 2 in the morning I was thoroughly tipsy and ready to go home. Half a dozen of us were heading in the same direction. I live around the corner on Hassell Street, so I separated from the group and turned toward my house. When I walked in, the house was quiet. I guess I should have expected it at this hour. The guest room door was closed, so I assumed it was occupied, but I was feeling belligerent, so I opened it anyway. Both Lucy and Tracy were sound asleep. I closed the door and headed to my bed and fell fast asleep. I woke up around 6 in the morning, took a couple aspirin tablets out of habit, and wandered into the kitchen in search of a pitcher of orange juice. Lucy was standing at the kitchen sink, and I think she was as surprised to see me as I was to see her. I walked over to the refrigerator, poured myself a glass of juice, drank it while standing in all my glory, set the glass on the floor, and looked right at her. She's actually a very beautiful woman, probably the most beautiful of all the girls in Gallant. But that didn't matter. I want you out of my house when I wake up. I turned and walked back to the bedroom, locked the door, and climbed into bed to sleep for a couple more hours. When I woke up a second time around 10 a.m., both women were gone, so after showering and changing into something, I headed to the gym for a hard workout. Cranking out calories and reps is one of those things that fuels my cognitive abilities. I can think straight when the endorphins are kicking in, and it allows me to plan my day or develop a plan for whatever I'm working on. No matter how hard I worked, I kept coming back to a simple conclusion. Tracy really loved this guy. She loved him for the first time. At least it seemed to me that she loved him now, and I guess she was still in love with him when she met me. I fought the punching bag some more and headed home. "Can we talk now, Dave?" she asked, curled up in a chair by the window facing the street. She was clearly crying. For him or me, it remained to be seen. But she was right. It was time to talk. "Let me take a shower and we'll talk in the kitchen." 15 minutes later, we were sitting at the table across from each other with cups of coffee in front of us. "This is your show, Tracy. Please take it back." She held out my wedding ring to me across the table, and I took it, looked at it, and put it in my pocket. She didn't say anything about it. "I'm really sorry about all of this." "I never wanted anything like this," she began. "What are you sorry for, Tracy?" She looked at me, not knowing what to say. "Why don't you start from the beginning and realize how bad it was?" I suggested. I didn't think she knew that both her mother and Torrey had shared some important information with me, and I was curious how truthful and candid she would be if she started from the beginning. "Okay, that's for the best. His name is Charlie DeGuy, and I've known him for about 8 years now, dating back to my days working in Dallas. We were a couple until I broke up with him and moved to Charleston. I think he never got over it, and after learning that I traveled to Dallas regularly, he arranged for me to meet him one night, and we had dinner together. Lucy and I would go out for a drink, and Charlie would show up with his brother, whom Lucy dated from time to time. Eventually, it became a regular thing when I was in town. When did you first do it with him after you got back together?" I could tell she didn't want to answer that question. By the way, I had no proof that she had done it with him. I had only caught them together as an intimate couple at dinner. That was about 6 months ago. She stood up, walked to the bedroom, and returned with something in her hands. I'd been thinking about it for 3 or 4 months, and one night when Charlie and I were visiting Lucy, I heard her doing it. I hadn't planned it, but I let him that night. Call it hormones or jealousy or whatever, but I did it. She then tossed what she had in her hands onto the table. It was a pair of women's underwear. "I found them in your clothes after you came back from your trip to Memphis about a year ago, and I know for a fact that they aren't mine." I stared at them for a moment before answering. "I wish you had told me then, not what happened now." We looked at each other and she continued. "When I was in Dallas, Charlie and I were doing this until a couple months ago when he moved back to Denison for a new job. I realized I had let the situation get out of control, but then I let him talk me into flying down to spend time with him. I made up a trip to Atlanta and flew to Dallas. That first night I stayed in Dallas with Lucy, and the next day she and I and Charlie's brother Rob drove to Denison. After you caught me there, I made Lucy drive me back to Dallas that same night. I never slept with Charlie on that last trip, Dave. I knew what I did was terribly wrong. I could see the tears in her eyes. Are you still entertaining her? She asked, pointing to the clothes. Only once, and looking back, I should have told you what happened, but I had no excuse. What would you have told me? She asked. I told her the whole story, leaving nothing out, and we both sat there, unsatisfied with ourselves. Tracy, do you love him? I don't know, Dave. Sometimes I think I do, and sometimes I don't know. I filled cups of coffee and stood, wondering what we should do next. Susan was right. I needed to figure out if my love was enough and if I could survive a long affair with all his deceptions. I could blame my indiscretion on the ice storm and the tequila, but I'd be lying to myself. After all, we'd be lying to each other if we kept making excuses. You need to figure out if you love the man you want to marry, and I need to figure out if I can survive a 6-month affair with a man who has captured your heart at least once. I think we should break up for a while. She choked up when I said that, and the tears started to flow, and I had a second thought I hadn't considered until now. Who was that man you and Lucy were with at Henry's last night? At first I thought her lips wouldn't move or form into words, but eventually the tears and irritation on her face caused her to push them out of her mouth. It was Charlie. You sent that bastard here with you? I asked incredulously and with growing anger. No, he followed us here on Thursday when Lucy told him where we were. I don't know why, but I think I believed her. Well, that's convenient for you. You can test your love for him here, but not in this house. I was furious, but I felt good for a while. Tracy needed to be in Minneapolis in a couple days, so she booked a return flight to Dallas and stayed with her in-laws for a while, traveling out of Dallas for work instead of Charleston. Torre had tacitly kept me in the loop, and through that contact I learned that Tracy and Lucy sometimes went out on the town together. I considered assigning a private investigator to follow her around over the weekend, but in the end, I just didn't see the need. She needed to determine for herself who and what was important in her life. I knew one thing. The longer she took to find herself, the easier it would be for me to let her go. I applied today, she said at the table across from me. It was unexpected. I didn't see the point in procrastinating, and we both know it's inevitable. Given what she'd already told me, I guess I agreed with her. How did he take it? I asked. Susan just shrugged and said, I have no idea, and I'm not going to go to Saudi Arabia right now to find out. How are things on your front? She asked. It's been a month now. I hear from her every week, but I have a feeling she's settled down for a while. She has reverted to bad influences, and to tell you the truth, I half expect to get the papers myself eventually. If it's her decision, I'll let her file the papers. What about your decision, Dave? I've thought a lot about it and what you told me in Durant. I love her, and I think that's enough to make the marriage strong, but I can't compete with the ghost of another man if she still loves him. She must choose me or him, not both. If I get all her love in the end, then all will be well. I can't go any other way. The breakup went on for another couple months without any resolution. I knew she was still dating the bastard, but then I had given her that invitation myself. Further actions didn't surprise me. Eventually, Tracy returned to Charleston only to tell me that she was moving back to Dallas and wanted to part ways amicably. She believed she never stopped loving him, and the raspberry on top of the pie was that she couldn't get past the lavender underwear. Imagine that? I didn't know if I could survive a 6-month affair. As she stood at the condo entrance, it was raining, and I watched her get into a waiting cab and drive off down Hassell Street. I stood on the steps and finally found myself crying in the rain. It's a great opportunity, lad. You'd better grab it before some other sprawling prick gets his hands on it. Monroe sat puffing on an unlit cigar. I need you to give me an answer in a couple days. Will that be satisfactory to you? By the way, I'm sending a corporate engineer to the plant, a pretty girl named Susan DeLong, or Co. She goes by her maiden name now. The old man was on his guard, and he knew it. The Durant plant needed a new vice president of operations, and the executive team, meaning Monroe, chose me for the job. At age 36, I would become the youngest VP of operations in the company, but that meant I would have to leave Charleston and head for the hills of southern Oklahoma. I didn't have to wait a couple days. I agree. We shook hands, and 3 weeks later, I was once again driving down Interstate 75 in North Texas, this time in bright sunshine. As I drove through Sherman-Denison on my way to Red River, a strange feeling lingered in my mind, but I only gave it a fleeting thought. There were no storm clouds portending bad things to come. The management team was waiting for me, and I had already picked out the place where I wanted to build my house, right on Lake Texoma, a 15-minute drive from the plant. Good afternoon, Mr. Hoff. The receptionist at the plant was a pleasant young girl named Rose, and she greeted me as I entered through the main entrance. We had met during an extruder installation the year before. My HR manager met me at the office, escorted me to a corner suite, and informed me that the entire management team was ready to get together when I wanted to start work. I waited until I could get settled in the office, and the first thing I did was ask one of the operators, whom I had befriended on previous visits, to give me an in-depth tour of the entire plant. It was an eye-opener. The housekeeping operations were sloppy. Several safety fences were not working, and it seemed as if 5S and other lean manufacturing measures had been put on hold instead of fighting fires. No wonder Monroe was smiling. That first day was a revelation not only for me, but for the entire management team. I laid down the law for everyone. The plant had to get its safety program in order immediately, and we had to start rebuilding the team first thing in the morning. That evening, I sat at the bar at Choctaw Casino and Resort, sipping a pint of ale, watching a lot of people perform calculations in various states of consciousness to determine how much more they were willing to lose in numerous gambling games. I've never been a gambler myself, unless you count that first marriage. It took 9 months of courtship to become a husband, and after 4 years of marriage, it took another 6 months to get out of it. For the last 6 months after my maternity leave, I've been trying to process the sense of loss I experienced watching her drive away in the pouring rain in downtown Charleston. It was my pair of underwear against her poor judgment, and in the end we were both losers and winners. Losers in the sense that we lost each other in an unnecessary battle, and winners in the sense that each of us walked away without getting burned by the other. Tracy still owned her house on Daniel Island, which she held as an investment property. I still had my apartment on the peninsula, and we both had separate savings and pensions, and no alimony. I was still in touch with Steve and Donna in Denton, although the conversations became less frequent as the months went by. With Tracy's sister Claire, we had barely spoken to each other when I was still married, and the divorce hadn't changed anything. With Torre, it was different. Our conversations became more frequent, even though I was clear that I didn't need to know everything that was going on in Tracy's life. I would find out anyway. As for Lucy, that stuff can fester if I'm interested. Tracy and her soul partner moved in together after he moved back to Dallas, and she refused to move to Sherman. The two of them flew to Las Vegas a month ago and came back from there married, much to Torre's relief. She wasn't going to attend the wedding if invited. I guess that was the finale of our epic as a couple. It meant there was no going back, and there was no chance of that either. I think it was her marriage to that guy that allowed me to do something new with my life and take that assignment in Durant. I think Monroe saw that too. "Excuse me, Mr. Hoff, but isn't this seat taken?" she asked, lowering herself into a chair and not waiting for my answer. "Well, I've been saving it for a certain savage." Susan only rolled her eyes. Her divorce had been finalized around the same time as mine, but it hadn't gone as smoothly as she thought it would. Her husband Billy fought back and tried to have a big property battle and at one point even demanded alimony. Susan's lawyer just laughed it off, providing a copy of their tax returns that showed his income was higher than hers. He then switched gears and accused her of adultery, but without any proof. That failed too. The judge ruled, but she had to sell the house to give him half of the equity as she didn't want to live in it. Why he fought so hard, no one knows. The poor guy realized what he was losing, but realized it too late and it was eating away at him. He emailed her a picture of some slut. In response, she forwarded it to her friends with the caption, "Awesome gesture," and that was the last she heard from him. That crazy wild thing might make you late for your morning meeting. I can get you there on time and ready for a busy day. Without a second thought, we got down to it. I'm going to sleep right here tonight instead of going back to my room, she whispered to me. Moments later, we were cuddled up on the bed watching the late evening news and then fell asleep snuggled up against each other. Susan had attended morning staff meetings ever since, though she'd reported to Monroe back in Charleston. I'm sure he planned it that way because he knew we met from time to time, but for practical purposes, she worked for me. She was the one who made the suggestion I needed to hear. You need to lay off about a third of the staff, Dave. They're not up to the job of transforming this place, and you know it. At that point, we'd been working at the Durant facility for 2 weeks, and I was just beginning to really get to know most of the management team. Susan was right. A safety manager will one day kill someone with his indifference. Reliability and capital planning were virtually non-existent. My supervisor didn't have a clue about the production floor. In short, the company was a mess. A month later, half of my staff was new, and we were taking the first steps toward a renewed and entrepreneurial team. The point of all this was not only to keep the plant functioning, but also to give me a chance to start a personal life away from the plant, namely laying the foundation for my new home. I flew to Charleston to close the condo sale and bring Monroe up to speed, and stayed for the weekend. Friday night when I walked in, Henry's was bustling with activity, and Such was fiddling around at the bar. "Hey man, another Russian?" he shouted, blocking out the noise. I just nodded and handed him my card. Then he gave me a déjà vu look. "Your ex?" "She left here about an hour ago with her new man and that little blonde with the tattoo. They left the bar tab open and said she'd be back, just so you know." He grinned like a Black Reaper. Screw her, him, and especially that other one. I wasn't about to get kicked out of my favorite establishment. Buy me a drink and tell me how the closing went. Susan had flown in with me to work with Monroe for a week on next year's budget, and tonight she dressed up and perfected her killer look. There wasn't a young female student in the place who could outdo her in this arena. Of course I was biased, but Such kept her on her toes as well. Such told me that the idyllic modern woman was here with her new husband and sister and that they were planning to return. Aside from that, the closing went well. The money's in the bank, and until I build a house, I'm technically homeless. Do you have a room you can spare for a bum? Only if you work at it, and speaking of work, here they are. She winked and nodded toward the doorway and the other end of the bar. I glanced at my reflection in the mirror, and sure enough, the three of them had taken a seat at the far end of the bar. I turned back to my companion and tried to ignore the mastodon in the room, but to no avail. Lucy whizzed past, heading for the ladies' room. When she returned, she made her presence known. "Dave, I thought you'd cropped your tail and run off to parts unknown." "New meat?" she said, trying to syrup the words passing through her pouty lips, and glanced at Susan. "One of the frat houses is looking for a good bitch. Permanent job. You can get an invite at the other end of the bar. Goodbye, Lucy." I turned back to Susan and ignored whatever else she had to say, and she just disappeared into the crowd. "Nice girl," said Susan, suppressing the smirk that was eager to break out on her face. "The bitch from the fraternity house?" At that moment, laughter erupted. Soon we were joined at the bar by several regulars who wanted to know what was new in my life and congratulate me on my promotion. However, I was still keeping the trio at the end of the bar in mind. Tracy's friends joined them and they moved to a table out of sight. Susan decided to distract herself from my thoughts and, with her arms around me, chatted until almost 2 in the morning and almost closing time. I stayed with her in her hotel room and she was definitely driving that night. The following Monday, I was back in southern Oklahoma, and I talked to Torrey that evening. I mentioned that I had seen Tracy in Charleston and found out that she was back there for the same thing I was, to finalize the sale of her house on Daniel Island. She'd been renting it out for the last year, and the tenants had decided they wanted to buy it. I also wanted to tell you that Jimmy and I are getting a divorce. Jesus, Torrey, I didn't expect that. I really didn't. Me neither, she replied, and I heard her cry softly. She pulled herself together and continued. He started having an affair with a woman working for a client, and the next thing he knew, it was a full-blown love affair, and now she's pregnant with his baby. One big damn mess. Life sucks, doesn't it? She tried to laugh between sobs, but she failed. We'll work it out with the kids and the house. Screw it, you know how it is. It's a damn divorce. Torrey, you know I'll be there for you if you need anything. How did Steve and Donna take it? I haven't told them yet. You're the only one I've told, but I will. It'll break Dad's heart. He loves Jimmy. We talked some more, and I decided to drive to Denton to spend the day with her and the kids and help in any way I could. I was tempted to call Jimmy and tell him what I thought, but what the hell would that accomplish? Instead, I decided to help Tora as much as I could. The following Saturday, I lugged a couple of Moe's pizza boxes and a 12-pack of Hyris beer into the kitchen of Tori Richardson's soon-to-be single and beautiful mom. My parents have a couple of kids, Jimmy Jr. and Ann, ages 12 and 10 respectively, and over the past few years I've grown to love them as if they were my own. They greeted me with eager energy, as always, and when I looked at her, it took my breath away. I kept thinking, how could this man be so stupid to abandon this beautiful woman like that? The four Gallant sisters all look alike. Each has blonde hair, blue eyes, and an athletic build. They were all born one after the other within 4 years. Tora felt uncomfortable as she stood like this. She was wearing shorts and a halter and sandals, and her hair was braided into a French braid. The halter was doing its job, but barely. It was an odd sensation. When I'd seen Tracy a few nights earlier, she'd reminded me of Tori, and now that she was standing in front of me, I didn't have a single thought or concern for Tracy. Jesus, he's a damn fool, I said without thinking and quickly apologized. A sly grin appeared on Tori's face. His loss, I guess, she replied. The kids had already started on their food and we joined them. Later in the afternoon, they tended to the pool and the neighborhood kids, while Tori and I relaxed on the patio. Let's go out to eat today, Dave. I know where you'll take me. Okay, so she just asked me out. How could I say no? I couldn't, so I accepted the offer. I want you to take me to the Cattleman's and then we'll go to the Whiskey Girl. Huh. Jesus, you've got the whole night booked. All right, Fort Worth then. Both places are on Stockyard. I had been to Cattleman's before, but Whiskey Girl was unfamiliar to me. Nevertheless, my obligatory two-step Lucchese boots were in the car. Being a Charlestonian, I didn't bother to buy a hat. The kids stayed with a neighbor, and after freshening up and changing clothes, the two of us set off for Fort Worth. At dinner, we got to talking. And when did he have time to get at you? Asked I. About 3 weeks ago. He just lashed out at me, laid everything he thought, and told me he wanted a divorce. I cried for 2 weeks, even when I talked to you last Monday, but now I'm about to cry all the tears I was going to cry. We settled on child support and the house this week. He got the rest of his stuff and can see the kids whenever he wants. I'll never be a bitch about it, and he knows it. I could see it in her eyes. She's a survivor, and as beautiful as she is, she won't be on the market for long. Some cowboy would try to snatch her up as soon as she became available. So are you still starring in that hot number that caused your divorce? She asked. I had to laugh at that question. I told her the whole story, and she knew that Susan and I were seeing each other regularly. Every chance I get, I replied. Yes, but is it something serious? There was a more inquisitive look in her eyes now. Funny thing, Susan and I snuggled up to each other every chance we got, went out to eat when we could, and as far as I knew, were exclusive with each other. I know I wasn't interested in chasing a piece of ass in every city I showed up in, and I knew for a fact that Susan had turned down more jocks than she could count. But were we in a serious relationship? I didn't know. We enjoyed the rest of our dinner, and later she pointed me toward the Whiskey Girl saloon. Me and my girlfriends used to come here on Wednesdays, have half-price drinks, and watch cowboy asses all night. She giggled, and when I raised an eyebrow in jest, she added, "Oh, don't give me that look. Nothing else happened." I believed her. She wasn't the type to run around in a marriage. There were a few guys who asked her to dance, and I certainly didn't mind, but she only danced swing numbers with a couple of them. Nothing slow. She saved all those numbers for me. Under other circumstances, I would have gotten a number. It was quite clear that she was mine if I wanted her, and truth be told, I wanted her but couldn't. I was tied up with another woman. I was Uncle Dave to her children, and just as importantly, she was going through a marriage breakup and was vulnerable to me. I know how she felt about me, and frankly, I felt about the same way about her. I could have loved this woman for the rest of my life if it weren't for the baggage we both brought into this life. Instead, we had a quiet drive to Denton, and she put me up for the night in the guest bedroom. I had broken ground on my lakeside lot 3 months earlier and ordered an oak log cabin from Sevierville, Tennessee, which their team put in place with utilities and finishes in less than 60 days. The previous week, a local crew from Durant had finished building the dock and launching the boats, and I watched one of the local marinas launch my new Sea Hunt 22-foot BX. Susan had bought a house a couple months ago, and I was spending half my time at her place rather than living in a hotel. Monroe let me stay with her temporarily until the house was finished, but like I said, hotel rooms aren't my favorite place to hang out, even if I'm living off the company. Uncle Dave, it's time to go. The fish aren't going to sit here all day, shouted my niece Anne as Jimmy Jr. and I walked down to the dock. She already had her life jacket on and was waiting at the stern. Tori had let me keep the kids for the weekend after they had been pestering her for over a month. Add up 2 kids in a lake and they wanted their own rooms, and for good. I was fine with that. They were great company, and after a while my lake house became their permanent vacation spot. After 2 days of fishing, swimming, and burning a tank and a half of gas on water skis, Tori came to pick up the 2 slightly burned and exhausted kids. After I talked her into keeping them for one more night and providing her with a guest room, the 2 of us settled on the porch, admiring the sunset in the west. Tracy caught that creep cheating on her again, she said, looking at my reaction. And what, twice already since they got married 9 months ago? A smug smirk appeared on my face. The first time since the wedding, Charlie Dugai had been caught partying with Lucy's other friend during a drunken party in Austin, and the girl's boyfriend hadn't taken too kindly to it. He'd put a damn good bruise on his eye. True love, I added. Tori only slapped me playfully. This time she came home unexpectedly and caught him in their bed. She packed up her things and moved back home with Mom and Dad. Neither of them are thrilled about that, I'll tell you. I'll have to remember to send flowers and condolences to Steve. I'm cruel, I know. They love her as much as any of you. Tori looked at me strangely before speaking again. She told me she made a mistake shortly after she got back from Vegas. It helps her a lot now. I can't remember who told her, Mom or Claire, but one of them told her that she would regret leaving you for that dirtbag until the day she died. I think she realizes that now. I answered nothing and turned to the landscape. The sun had finally lowered the last remnants of its soft glow over the horizon, and I watched Tori's face in the fading light. She gazed out over the water, and the twilight emphasized her gallant features before she turned to me again. We sat there talking about everything in the world for a couple more hours before stopping for the night at Lake Texoma. After she cleaned herself up and put on one of my t-shirts, we sat on the porch and enjoyed our morning coffee. Dave, we should probably talk business. What do you want to talk about, Susan? You and me, what you want, what I want. Do you want to get married, settle down, or do you like things the way they are? Jesus, how the hell am I supposed to answer that? I really hadn't thought about marriage, but if that's what she wanted, I'd seriously consider it. And then it hit me. At least now it wouldn't be what I wanted, but what she might want, and that would never work in the long run. Susan, I'd be lying if I said I didn't like what we have now, but to be honest, I'd probably be convinced of that if you wanted to go further. I just don't see why we'd want to change what we have now. Okay, I whirled around in circles, but she saw right through me and blurted out one of her trademark infectious grins, then jumped up and sat on my lap, wrapping her arms around my neck. Okay, Romeo Hoff, I think we both feel the same way. I thought you were going to insist on marriage, and like you, I'm happy with what we have. But I want to talk about something else. I married Billy right out of college when I was 21, and hell, I'm almost 39 now. And yet I'm also effeminate, I interrupted. Shut up, I'm not a mother. I mean, one of the contract techs on the floor asked me out a while ago, and I turned him down even though I really wanted to. And here's the thing. I felt like a wife, and I'd just spent 16 years doing it, mostly suffering for the last 4 years. Susan, baby, listen to me for a minute. I realized where this conversation could lead, and I needed to reassure her. You and I enjoy each other's company. You're a great companion. We fit together like gloves, and God knows you have to be the best lover I've ever been with. But I'm not your husband. You're not a married woman, and if you want to go out and have a good time, no, even a great time, you're a free woman who can do just that. Since the divorce, we've hardly spoken to each other, with few exceptions for both of us, and not once since we moved here. I'm not going to sit around and sulk if you go out and have a good time. You already know I've gone out with Tori a couple times and tried not to entertain her. Oh my God, I tried so hard. She tapped me on the shoulder at the last remark, but only playfully. Torre is a little different. You know what her baggage is, I don't need to explain it. If I did that with Torre, it would make the two of us an exclusive and serious couple, and we both knew it, which is why it didn't happen. Dave, stop it! We understand each other! I want what we have to continue as long as it's good for us. If I have sex with anyone else, it will only be sex. I only make love to you, okay? I just held her for a few moments before I picked her up in my arms and led her to the dock. You wouldn't dare, Dave Hoff. I did and followed her into the water at the end of the dock. That ought to cool your dirty little mind a little. I laughed. Susan ended up going out with the technician a couple of times, and I have to admit that the second time she spent a weekend with him in San Antonio, I walked the floor a bit, at least until Torre rescued me from my imaginary pits of despair, and we repeated stockyards. One evening, I was sipping a new bottle of wine in a chair on the marina when my tranquility was interrupted by the phone ringing. Dave, is this a good time? Can we talk? I didn't want to, I really didn't, but something inside told me it would do me good. Tracy, I think now would be a good time. Can we talk on the phone? No, that's why I parked out front. Well, that caught me off guard, so I invited her back and met her on the porch, offering her a glass of wine before we sat down. I couldn't deny that she looked good. She looked gorgeous as usual. Her hair was considerably longer. Well, we both look good, I said with a half-drunken look. She raised an eyebrow and I saw the hint of a tiny smile trying to make its way to the corners of her mouth. Maybe it was the alcohol, but for a moment I thought that if she grabbed me, I would go on full defense and purposely weaken. Our divorce was about as friendly as the experience of an adulterous whore, a dog, a cheating bitch, a cuckold, not to mention my own feelings of guilt, can be. Outwardly, however, we smiled, even hugged, and went our separate ways. Guilt wanted me to yell bitch to no one in particular. Torre keeps me posted on how you're doing, Dave. She knows I'm a fool, but who doesn't these days? Mom and Dad asked me to say hi to you. They're good people, Tracy. Yeah, they take care of me when no one else will. I'm grateful to them. I needed to sit and talk to someone I love tonight, and I know what we had is long gone, but you're the only person I know who could tell me things like they are. Considering how things turned out, I don't know how well I did. She averted her gaze, trying not to look away from me. It's funny that you live practically in my backyard after I moved here after my self-destruction. I guess you know that, mister. Wonderful lasted long enough to request a divorce, not an annulment. What a complete asshole I am. I knew she wanted to cry, but I didn't need to. I'd already cried in the rain twice, and I wasn't about to go through it again. Tracy, this is all water under the bridge. You'll be what you make yourself when you realize that. It's the old Monroe truism. I chuckled. Good old Monroe. You know, I always liked that old lecher. Did you know he once pinched my ass at a New Year's Eve party you guys threw at the alley? She laughed, started to relax, and after a pause, continued. Dave, can we be friends? I don't have any friends left and I'm lonely. The next morning I woke up alone in bed, the alcoholic haze had cleared, and the realization was swirling around in my head that I seemed to be entertaining my ex-wife. I was very drunk and that was my excuse. I blamed it on the wine, but I knew it was for the best. Slipping into the shower and throwing on some clothes, I found her letter on the table. My sweet darling Dave, I didn't want to be here when you woke up and see me crying my heart out. I'll do it on the way down, in my loneliness. Last night was the best night of my life, not counting my wedding night and the worst at the same time. Worse because I decided to leave Texas and move to the West Coast. I told Mom and Dad about it yesterday, and although they were saddened, they understood why. Earlier this week, I quit my job and took a job with a company in San Jose. No traveling like I used to, so it looks like I'm going to have to learn to put down roots. Dave, I've made so many mistakes I don't even know where to start. Perhaps first and foremost, I apologize for not talking to you after that trip to Memphis. God knows I know what you become when you drink Cuervo, and I believe none of this would have ever happened if I had been the strong-willed woman you married. The next big problem, besides the fact that I never dated that loser, was expecting you to fight for me. I know you shifted the decision to me, but when you stepped away and let me hang myself, I had to rush home and beg you to take me. Yes, I mean home because that's where my home will always be with you. Everything else will just be a place where I spend my nights. I know you've seen Torre a few times, and while I don't know how that will turn out, please do the right thing by her. She loves you, I know, but she's also scared because you're family, and it's hard for her to accept that. I will always love you, sweetheart, always. And even though I know I've ruined everything we had, I can only hope that you find the peace and love that I know you need. I wish it was me, but I'm afraid I know that will never happen. You deserve better, much better. If you're ever in San Jose, please find me. I'll buy it. Your ever-loving wife, Tracy. I sat at the table for a few minutes, sipping my coffee and rereading the letter. There were some things I wanted to say to her this morning that needed to be said. I forgave her for what she had done, and I hoped she forgave me for my own sins. I may have vented all my anger the night before, but that morning I just felt sadness for what we had lost. Several years had passed since the events at Freewheels, and life was going on in its own way and in its own circumstances. I gathered up the letter and put it, along with other things from our marriage, in my dresser drawer, next to the wedding ring she returned to me at the kitchen table on that last day when we were a full-fledged couple. Susan returned to Charleston for a few weeks to work on another project in which Monroe needed help, and I tried to immerse myself in various projects at the plant, but felt distracted. At the end of one particularly frustrating day, our secretary Rose invited me to join her and her husband and a few others that evening at Choctaw Restaurant. I arrived at the appointed hour and found myself at a table with Rose and Walter, her husband, and two other women, Sarah, whose last name I forget, and an interesting 30-year-old divorcee named Winona Gustafson. It was the latter who piqued my curiosity. She had worked in a casino until she went back to school and was now an assistant radiologist at a hospital in Sherman. We had a great dinner, and when it was over, I offered to buy a round at the bar, and because of the hour, Winona was the only one who could stay. It takes a little imagination to describe her. She wears a short pixie cut, which she dyes in various shades of dark purple mixed with her natural black hair. Both arms are covered in intricate black and gray sleeve tattoos up to her wrist, and she says she has several tattoos of roses and vines girdling her chest and running down her torso. Years ago, Winona was a biker and married to a burly Swede, hence her last name, until they separated due to certain needs she had while he was overseas on extended fieldwork for an oil company here in Oklahoma. She was a nymphomaniac, she said, and to fulfill that need, she married several men while her husband was on a business trip overseas. On his last trip, he returned home and discovered that she was married a second time to a retired Marine who had broken up with her when he learned the truth as a result of a confrontation with the big guy. She fell very much in love with the Marine, and then decided to break up with her husband and reinvent herself by going back to school. That was her old life when she worked at the casino, and since then, she has dedicated herself to getting her degree and trying to settle into what she calls a normal world. We swapped stories with her until late into the night when she finally had to leave it all behind and head south. I did talk her into giving me her phone number and gave her my card. For the first time in a long time, I hummed to myself as I drove home. This humming requires some explanation. Susan had found a man she felt she was serious with. As she said, it was very similar to my own experience with Tracy. She fell in love at first sight, and they have been a couple ever since. We didn't have any away sex, and I probably wouldn't have if she'd suggested it. She was clearly in love with the guy, and her place was in his bed, not mine. It turned out to be a very good thing. Our friendship became even closer. She hasn't told him about our affair and probably won't, because that would only raise suspicions about our friendship, but I can talk to him myself, with Susan's blessing. I really like the guy, and I have a job that I think he'd be great at. Rose knew this, which is why I think she invited me that night with her group, although she thought I would be more interested in another woman who held a much more traditionalist pose. The salesman knew he was close to the zone. I'd been looking at the darkened fat boy for over 30 minutes, and the only decision left for me was the number of options I wanted to add to it. I definitely wanted a cushioned passenger with a small back. Perhaps I was going through an early midlife crisis, but Harley's status symbol, the fat boy, had been pulling at me for quite some time. It didn't take much effort on the seller's part, and we closed the deal the same day. Unfortunately, I had to wait almost 60 days for delivery due to lack of orders. When it was delivered, I took my first trip down south. I was sitting on it in the parking lot outside Texoma Medical Center when Winona came out after her shift. She even squealed when she saw it, an interesting sound. She changed into a short skirt and halter top and put blue-lensed sunglasses on her face before taking her seat. I pointed south, and within a minute we were on our way to Denton to see Tori and join her and her friend for a night in Fort Worth. Sometimes I feel like I'm in honeymoon prep school. Susan was my lover before settling on her Mr. Right. And Tori was kidnapped, as I promised, though I had a chance and didn't take it. But none of that mattered. There was a little minx riding behind me. When we pulled up to Tori's house, her overnight bag was in the back seat, along with her dancing boots. Tori greeted us, and we were introduced to Dan, her new beau, and another couple who had joined us for the evening. The evening went great. We had dinner at Cattleman's and then went to an establishment I had never been to but had always heard of, Billy Bob's. We danced till we dropped, and at one point I switched partners with Dan and brought Tori out onto the floor. Is he the guy you want to be with for the rest of your life? Hell, I don't know that yet, Dave. He's a lot of fun. He loves my kids. He's got 2 of his own and he's grooming me left and right. Well, he's better off. You're the prettiest girl in Texas, and he'd be a fool to let you walk away like I did. She looked at me with a strange expression and then just pressed her cheek against my shirt as we danced a slow waltz. I glanced over at Dan and Winona, and he was definitely enjoying this dance. Seeing a tall cowboy dancing with a lightly tattooed punk biker girl was very amusing. Where are you staying tonight, Dave? I booked a room not far from here. Why don't you cancel it and stay at my place? Winona and you can take the guest room by the pool. When we were done for the evening, I did just that. Another couple was staying with us as well, and one of them pulled out a bottle to drink. I briefly remembered that night in Memphis, but with Winona by my side and no guilt, I indulged her. We all slept until mid-morning, and when I got up, the ladies were in the kitchen, and there were only 2 of us guys left. Dan had left early after talking to Tori. I didn't push the matter. Winona and I stayed after the other couple left, and I sipped a beer on the patio, watching 2 very beautiful women swim naked in the pool, and then lay back, sunbathing in the natural sun. It was a good day to be a man. That night in Denton changed the dynamics of our relationship, mostly for the better, in some cases for the bad. Dan was disappointed when Tori ended their relationship, and I can't blame him. She was the booty call of a lifetime for him, but she didn't love him, and she wasn't going to lead him on. He was looking for a wife, and it wasn't her. Winona and I met a couple times a week, and it was always stormy. This Marine had to stand up to it. She was worth it. Another trait of Winona's was her amazing insight into human relationships. She knew Tori and I had a close relationship, and it didn't bother her one bit. One evening on my front porch, she explained it well. Dave, I've had a lot of men over the years, a lot more when I was younger and wilder, but since then there haven't been many left. I'm very fond of you. If you weren't in love with Tori, I'd destroy any bitch that got near you because you're so good. But I know there are other great catchers out there. I've had my share of them. I've had men fall in love with me, and I've loved other men. I just haven't met one yet who will love me as much as I love him. When that happens, I won't be with anyone else but him. Tori is going out more and more, and like me, she's enjoying herself here and there, but she's waiting for you to make the move. When you do, she won't even blink an eye in the direction of another man. You will own her, and she will own you. Do you understand what I'm telling you, you stubborn piece of beef? That night was the last time I made love to Winona, and we remembered it for the rest of our lives. The next morning, I rode the Harley to Denton, stopped at a place to buy a dozen roses, and went to Tori's door. When she answered it, I knew it was time. The kids were at their father's again, and the 2 of us were sitting on the terrace. Tori, I can't guarantee that everything will be perfect and work out the way we expect, but I'd like us to try and build a relationship together, an exclusive relationship. I don't want to be with another woman, that goes for Winona too, and you know what I'm giving up. We both laughed at that. Thus began Gallant's next great romance. It took me several years of thinking about my love for this woman before I was ready to make a commitment. The next day, I paid a visit to Steve and Donna's house and asked their permission to meet Tori on a serious level. I felt indebted to Steve in particular. I had already taken one of his daughters and was now working on the second. I didn't doubt his feelings, but he made me feel like a man when he proudly gave me his blessing. I had one more trip to make, and it was going to be a difficult one. The flight to San Francisco went without incident late Friday night, and the drive to Santa Clara, where Tracy had bought an apartment, was marred only by my own anxiety. She knew I was coming because I didn't want to interrupt the meeting or get into an awkward situation. She was a single woman living her life, and I certainly knew what that would entail. I parked in the visitors area and headed over to her place with a bottle of wine as a warming gift. The knock on the door was hesitant, but the answer was quick. She immediately hugged me and kissed my cheek, and when she pulled away, I saw a tear in her eye. Torre called me earlier, we had a long talk, and I think we both cried all we needed to in a couple lifetimes. Dave, she's the perfect woman for you, and she's so in love she can't live without you. I know you wanted to talk to me about this in person, and I appreciate it, but honestly, I'm fine with that. So instead of crying, let me grab my bag and let's go out to dinner. I have a great table that I know you'll enjoy, and you can tell me about the kids. That's how the whole visit went. She was totally supportive, and we became the friends she wanted us to be. I found out she was seeing someone, even though it was nothing serious and she had already been promoted twice in her new position. Tracy hadn't been back to Texas since she moved to California, but Steve and Donna had come here a couple times, and Claire and her husband had flown in for wine harvest and tours of Sonoma County. There were a few tears when I flew home, but that was to be expected. We just wished each other the best, hugged, and I boarded the Boeing 767 with a clear conscience to make another gallant woman my bride. Epilogue. Torre Gallant Richardson and David William Hoff were married in a small ceremony on the shores of Lake Texoma on an early July morning in front of our Texas log home. Jimmy Jr. was my ring bearer and best man, and Ann was her mom's maid of honor. Steve gave her away in marriage, and all of her sisters attended the ceremony, including Tracy and Lucy. Tracy was accompanied by her current interest, an investment broker working in San Francisco. Lucy came alone and had a low-key demeanor throughout the event. As far as I was concerned, she was still trashy, but I put up with it for the sake of Torre and her family. On my end, my mother flew in for the event, accompanied by Monroe. It was unexpected, but they looked like a happy couple. My father had passed away a few years ago, and she was tired of being alone. Susan and Winona attended the event with their current companions. Susan and her true love didn't work out. He was too clingy and she felt stiffed by him, so she ended the relationship. Dave, I shouldn't have had that conversation with you this morning. Hell, I would have had a chance. She winked, but was serious at the same time. Even so, she'd met Torre and Winona, and we'd all occasionally gone to DFW for Saturday nights, though that time at Torre's was never repeated. I only had eyes for one woman now, and with a ring on each of our fingers, that's the way it was going to stay. Winona hasn't found that one man yet, but she makes attempts to find him from time to time, and I'm damn sure that whoever he is, he'll enjoy life to the fullest. A particularly strong friendship has developed between her and Torre, so we see her often. The kids think she's awesome. As soon as the ceremony was over, a quick morning downpour began, and instead of tears, there was only laughter. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. "Take care." That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. "I will do my best." Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. "Did you not hear what I said?" "I'm sorry." I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. "I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime," he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. "Still here?" Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. "I'm leaving." I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick? What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. "Probably Sam." Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. "Do you know how much revenue we get from that company?" "We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs. Gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized." Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. "All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason." "What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do." "I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please." Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, "Yes. That's Nick for you." Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, "I'm very sorry." Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, "Get his boss here immediately." It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? "All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next." Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. "Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize." Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry." Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.